Okay, I think we will simply get started. So welcome everybody to this new webinar session hosted by LHBS. My name is Bart Visser. I am the Strategy and Innovation Director at LHBS, and I am joined today by Joanna Bakas, who is the founder and managing partner of LHBS. So again, welcome to a new mini-series hosted by us called the New Normal Series. The idea of these mini-series is that we have casual talks about a broad range of business topics, ranging anywhere from consumer trends to market developments in the new normal, that hopefully brings you, the participant, some inspiration for some of your own business challenges. As you know, today we will be talking about telecommunications, and which will be presented by Joanna. And over the next 30 minutes, she will give you some insights into the lasting impacts of shifting customer demand on this industry. Of course, also looking at the impact of COVID. Now, to start off, I will share my screen quickly. So maybe for those of you who are not familiar with LHBS, a quick introduction. We are a strategic design agency that helps the clients by developing demand-driven strategic solutions. This can either be products or this can be services. What makes us unique as a consultancy service is that we specialize in end-to-end partnerships and focus on providing hands-on support, working together with our clients, building up their internal capabilities through knowledge transfer, and therefore ensuring that there is a lasting impact on the overall business results. Now, if you're interested in learning more about LHBS and the services that we offer, we invite you to go to our website, and there's a tab called Services, quite straightforward, and then you can find out a little bit more about what it is that we do. Some house rules before we really get started. Firstly, everybody that has joined the webinar is muted automatically. We ask you to please remain on mute because this helps with the noise and the quality of the sound, of course. There will be set moments in the webinar where we ask participants to unmute, since we are trying to have more of a casual conversation and a more friendly chat. But until maybe your name is called out by Joe, or maybe you want to clarify something by yourself at specific moments, we ask you to keep that on mute. For the duration of the entire webinar, there will be set moments where Joe will be answering questions. The best way to approach it is that we ask you to please put your questions in the chat, and at that said moment, I will then give Joe a couple of the questions that have been asked during that section. Joe will then, of course, do her best in order to answer. If you feel that your question has not been answered sufficiently, that will be then a moment where you will be able to unmute just to clarify and get appropriate answer towards what you need. Last note on privacy is that this webinar is being shown live on YouTube, and we are recording it. So if for data privacy concerns you do not maybe want to pop up on the screen, or you simply do not wish to participate in a webinar that is being recorded, either put your video off, or this will be then the moment to step out of the webinar. For those who are interested in seeing the recording of the webinar, I will post shortly in the chat a link to the website where you will then find a formula. That means that you will then be able, that you will receive an email that sends you a download link for the webinar. And we will also be posting it on LinkedIn. Then those were the administrative tasks. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it back to Joe.
Thank you, Bart. And as Bart said, welcome. It's a very interesting pleasure to be doing this, at least on our end, for the first time, though we participated as audience members. We're doing this series because during this entire crisis that has affected individuals and businesses in so many aspects of our lives in so many different ways, there's the immediate concerns that everybody had regarding health. There was the economic impact of having this shutdown. And there's a wealth of information and literature about initiatives, about what companies can do, about what individuals can do. And those are pretty much covered by a lot of different voices out there. What we've been really curious and passionate about and actually researching since the beginning of March, what is going to happen when this theoretically is kind of over? So we are dubbing it the new normal. A lot of people are talking about that. We are not coming out of this the same as we went into it. New normal is not a soundbite that I favor, but it seems to register its frame of reference of what everybody has been using lately. And we've kind of decided to start with the telco industry because it's something that's kind of close to our hearts. We've worked on numerous telco projects, everything from brand strategy to innovation to communication. So it's an industry that we've been dealing with for a long time. And it's also been at the epicenter of what I think has kept us sane during this entire situation, whether it's actually having the abilities to work while under quarantine, whether it's the ability to socialize with our friends through Zoom dinners and Zoom happy hours, just to entertain ourselves and be able to shop in safety. So I think the entire industry has come under a new limelight. It's also an industry that is somehow insulated from the immediate and severe economic impact that other industries and businesses are going through. I think from a global survey of leaders in the industry estimate declines in revenues for 2020 maybe at about 4 or 5%. That makes it, I said, much less vulnerable to the economic up and downs. But we still believe that this is not a time to stop investing in innovation, especially at a time where we are really seeing new behaviors, new expectations, which offer, we think, a lot of interesting opportunities for innovation. So what we're going to share with you is some interesting opportunity spaces. These are by no means comprehensive or defined as the only ones. It's just examples of opportunities. And we'll also, along with those, share a few examples of what other companies are doing as thought starters and a little bit of food for inspiration. So let me just share the screen with you. So Bart, you have to tell me if everything is working.
Yep, looks good.
All right, so as I mentioned, we are kind of living in unprecedented times. I don't think that anybody in the Zoom room right now is of the generation to have lived through something like this. The impact has been severe, like I said, on personal lives, on business. We still don't know how we're going to come out of this. People are talking about a second wave. So really unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures. And I'm not sure how well everybody has been surviving from this, but I think we're exhausted, we're tired. However, within the telco industry, we've seen, like I said, it's like, the industry has really been at the epicenter of keeping us sane for the last few months. And I think for the mid-future coming up for us as well. And the industry has initiated some really, really fantastic things to help society, to help individuals, to help healthcare workers in general. And there's just a couple of examples of those that I quickly wanted to share. So Ethio is a telecom from Ethiopia. It's the government-sponsored telecom provider. They actually had mandatory ringtones that whenever you were getting a call from a friend, your ringtone became a voice message reminding you to wash your hands, to safely distance yourself socially, to wear face masks. It was actually called a very successful measure in terms of maintaining the level of the outbreak in the country. In the UK, companies such as BT, Virgin Media, O2, Vodafone, Tesco Mobile pretty much all the big giants realized that healthcare workers who were working 24/7 overtime and also needed to communicate regularly, whether through text, voice, or data, to be able to get their jobs done. And their personal plan, and they were using their personal plans to actually do this for work. And it was a bit of a stretch for their budgets, and it was impacting them. So these companies joined together and actually created unlimited packages for these healthcare workers, so that something like personal finances would not be yet another weight on their shoulders when they were trying to manage with so many different and more important issues. Companies like Virgin Media in the UK and many, many around the world were offering people free data. This was really the way that we were connecting and pretty much conducting every part of our lives. So really fantastic initiatives during the crisis. And like I said, it's like telcos have often been referred to as a dumb pipe, simply being a network and a utility company. And a lot of brands have been actually struggling with that, of how to inject the entire industry and specific brands into a more emotional part of the consumer psyche. And this was a time when the industry actually did it, and it turned from a utility to a lifeline. And I think that in itself creates new opportunities for new momentum to move forward with a slightly different industry mindset. There was actually an article in Forbes magazine that actually the headline was, "This is the time to call and thank your telco provider." I think about 99% of consumers surveyed around the world said that they were incredibly, incredibly happy with the way that their providers performed and were able to service them during the time of crisis. And it wasn't just about maintaining, like I said, the capabilities of the network, which were really stressed and really, really, really stretched, as everybody was online doing streaming 24/7. But also the industry really introduced customer relief measures, which were seen as such an empathetic move, like removing data caps, offering better service channels that were self-service, didn't require people to venture out of the home, better low-cost data upgrades, payment waivers, and so forth. So it really came into the limelight with a new appreciation and I think a new emotional connection that could be leveraged in a new interesting ways for the future. So the question is then, okay, what's next? Everybody's kind of surviving. Everybody's kind of like getting by. The economies are starting to open. We still don't know what's going to happen next. And as we like to say at LHBS, is that reopening the economy is not the same as restarting the economy. On, I think it was May 23rd, Eurowings thought that travel was back. And they scheduled a flight from Stuttgart to Sardinia, took off on the entire route. Only as they were starting to land at the Sardinia airport did they find out from the airport staff that the airport was actually still on lockdown. So they had to turn the play around. And that's actually not the funny part of the story. The funnier part of the story is that there were exactly 2 passengers on board. So opening up is not the same as restarting. And I think every company, every industry needs to kind of think about what are new demands, what are new expectations, and how are we going to create new customer-facing offerings to actually meet a very different consumer and demand environment. So as I said, I think it's the opportunity to ride a very positive wave of a new purpose, is not just a utility, but a real provider of valuable services for businesses, for consumers, on the go and in the home. So a crisis is an accelerator, and the structure of this presentation is really going to be, what are 5 kind of behavioral trends that we've seen that we think are going to stick? And therefore, what will be the opportunities to, whether incremental or disruptive innovation, to meet this new changing demand? Some of these trends have been around for a while, so you may think to yourself that this is nothing new, but a crisis is an accelerator. And the things that we're talking about, some have already started, some were always kind of out there, but they've accelerated and built up a whole new momentum and really shifted the mindset and the behavior and therefore the demand of consumers. So we're going to talk about 5 signs of opportunities. One is carefulness in discretionary spending. which is really value consciousness and price consciousness is going to be around for a while for various reasons. Cocooning, the telco industry has started mobile first, is still very focused on mobile, and people will get out of their homes more, but not as much as we think in the past. So the opportunities to create new valuable services and then the ability to monetize home services is the second thing that we want to talk about. The third is accelerated digitalization. We have seen huge percentage of people actually enter digital interaction space in new ways, and people are going to actually maintain those behaviors because they've been proven useful, convenient, and yeah, so we think that is also an area to look into. Again, it's something that's been around for a while, but it's time to build momentum. Then we want to talk about 5G and IoT. I think these are very interesting areas to start exploring completely new customer segments and revenue streams, especially now at a time where a lot of companies have paid pretty large sums for licenses. And it's not a time to kind of sit on that cost and not do something about it. And then finally, just a couple of words about how to get these things done. It's really time to think about suspending business as usual rules of engagement at work and start working a little bit differently. I'm going to take you through these 5. I will stop at the end of each one and see if you have any questions. Bart will take them from the chat. He will voice it out to the audience, and we will, to the best of our ability, answer those questions. So, carefulness. I think this is an interesting chart. If there's ever been a winner, or if there is one of the biggest winners in this entire situation, it is obviously Amazon and any kind of e-commerce platforms. But what we're seeing is a rise in e-commerce is the kind of stuff that you need exactly during the lockdown and during the health crisis. Everything from basic food that you can stock up at home to cough medicines for people that are showing symptoms. I don't know where the bread making came in, but things like disposable gloves. Once the lockdown is down, people are going to be, let's say, less fearful about being able to actually access those products. So they're going out, but those are really trends that happen in a lockdown. If you look underneath with the blue marks, the fast declining product categories are things like clothing, consumer electronics, sports equipment. So these are the things that people are actually saying, do I really need this right now? And this thing of like, do I really need this right now should be a consideration whenever creating, launching, or supporting any kind of product and offering. It's like, is this now seen as the new essential or not? How many consumers will change their spending patterns after the crisis? Numbers show that because of inflated anxiety and deflated income, it's roughly 1/3 and in some countries more. So in France, 29%, in the US, 33%, in China, 37%. So these are behaviors that are going to stick until people feel more comfort and that they're 100% convinced that, let's say, the crisis has been completely eradicated. And it's driven by unemployment, it's driven by safety, anxiety, and so forth. A really important customer segment for the telco industry is small and medium enterprises. Pre-COVID, for 2020, the increased growth forecast for actually technology and communication services was 5.2%. And now it's down to less than 1%. For 2021, it looks a little bit better, but still the claimed increases in information technology and IT are also going to go down. So we're seeing SMEs, individuals have been hit, SMEs have been hit actually very, very heavily, either through severe downsizing and in some very unfortunate circumstances, bankruptcy. So this customer segment is also going to exhibit decreased demand. But even in a crisis, there's kind of like opportunities, even in careful spending, price consciousness, and a new redefinition of value. One area of innovation that's interesting is simply business model innovation. So you don't always have to build and launch new things. And we think like one business model that could be considered, and like, again, these are just a few examples, is the whole idea of freemium models borrowed from software as a service kind of thinking. Here's one example of actually one brand that is actually doing this. Freedom Pop is kind of like a cool and edgy provider of plans. Their purpose is explained as, we do not believe that connectivity is a privilege. We believe it's a basic human right. Therefore, they remove any possible barriers to actually deliver that basic human right. So their starting packages are actually from $0. And for that, you get 200 minutes, 500 text, and 500 megabytes of data. Of course, the freemium model then includes more basic plans, premium plans, and so forth. And they're still able to monetize this effectively, because even with a basic entry-level package, you still have the ability to actually generate revenue by upgrades to your data or to your voice or whatever within your monthly bundle. Value segments. We know that there's a lot of value brands actually in the market, but the leading brands tend to have a little bit more of a premium feeling. And it's nice to maintain a premium feeling, but maybe defining what premiumness also means, and at what expense do you want to kind of stay as a more premium brand. A really nice example of this, and it's quite unprecedented for Apple. Apple is not a technology company anymore, it's a luxury company. And they call themselves that. For the first time ever, Apple has actually introduced a low-end iPhone selling at 400 euros. They started production in January, they were on the market in April. Incidentally, they've also started for the very first time ever to reduce also the barriers to entry and the risks of buying by introducing payment plans. So for a company that is by definition expensive, premium, and actually luxury, they kind of recognized this opportunity and acted quite quickly with it. I think there's opportunity to think about introducing or supporting differently the value propositions in the portfolio, whether it's prepaid plans or whether it's actually value brands that a company has in their portfolio. And the last one here is reducing the risk of buying. As I said, people, especially for things that are a little bit expensive, or maybe they're sizing down some of the services that they're using. It's like you never kind of want to be in that situation where a consumer is saying, do I really need this? So reducing the risk of buying and alleviating some concerns of customers, especially when it comes to the issue of budgeting, home budgeting, and expenditures, is to do something that reduces the risks of buying. And Hyundai is a really good example here. So basically, in addition to actually deferring payments for 120 days, the company will actually cover up to 6 months of payments in case the customer has lost their job because of the corona outbreak. So if I was looking for a new car, if I had the need, removing this fear of, am I spending too much? Am I going to be locked in? Is, I think, a really nice example of reducing kind of like and relieving the risk. And as I said, a lot of telcos had introduced relief programs during the crisis, or during the lockdown, actually. And it might be an interesting question to ask oneself, can we keep some of those as part of our propositions, given that we've done the right kind of financial analysis behind it as well? So how could we potentially lose versus how could we potentially gain? So these are the three areas around actually careful spending. As I said, the connectivity is a necessity, but there are still possible effects on the industry and on brands through kind of an increased questioning of what people are spending their money on. So I would pause here for a couple of minutes and see if there were any questions or comments, or just...
So far, no questions are posted in the chat. So I would say in this case, maybe we can progress, and then we can see maybe at the next section.
Okay. So another area is this concept of accelerated digitalization. As I said, I think 99% of companies in the world have been going right now through a digital transformation in terms of internal optimization, but also customer-facing interactions. But this is the time to really build up momentum and actually make those digital channels the best possible that one can make in terms of less clicks, better user experience, better understanding the customer journey. So I think like these are areas where there's an opportunity to build momentum and be even better than before in making those channels as user-friendly, as effortless as possible. So, you know, people are actually accelerating the adoption of digital channels. So this chart shows various industries from banking, entertainment, grocery, telco carriers, travel, and insurance. And gray represents the regular users of digital services in these industries. And then the black ones on top represent the first time ever users during the corona lockdown. And it's really quite interesting. In banking, you know, from 51 to 73, in entertainment from 40 to 64, and even in telcos from 27 to 38. So these are pretty big increases in suddenly new entrants coming into digital channels. And some of them may not be as tech savvy as the regulars. Hence the comments that I made earlier about better UX, really understanding the customer journeys. And actually 75% of people using digital channels for the first time said that they will continue to use them because they've proven to be effective, to be easy, to be convenient, and just simple. And also going back to the B2B. So when asked pre-COVID, industry leaders claimed that their business-to-business customers were a little bit more likely to see traditional sales channels as important versus 48% of digital channels, 52% in traditional channels, 48% in digital channels. During the COVID and probably after the COVID, we've seen an entire shift on this. So they claimed that their customers have jumped and doubled. 66% would rather use digitally enabled sales interactions, while only 34% said no, traditional sales interactions are fine. So like I said, it's important for consumers and it's also important for business to business. What are like few areas that one might consider like playgrounds for innovating new experiences through digitalization? One is sales, thinking about e-commerce and e-space. This is just an example of IKEA is basically using 3D and AI supported possibilities in terms of online shopping to actually recreate the shopping experience. A few telco companies, I don't know, we've talked to a few, some say that they will actually reduce the number of physical retail locations, some will not. Whether people will continue visiting them more often, not sure, that is yet to be seen. However, it's a very important channel for upselling and cross-selling. So it's not just a place where you go buy a phone. The same is true for banking, for example. So is there a way to actually create a digital experience for that in-store experience and not necessarily through a shopping platform like an e-commerce platform? I mean, we've seen a couple of brands actually create digital e-space virtual stores where it kind of feels like you're interacting with individuals. So it's the digitalization of previously an offline experience. It's challenging, but it's really an interesting place to see where did people used to go physically and how can you make that experience as great in the digital space as well. The other one is service. We looked at a survey from McKinsey, who's been tracking the increase in the preference for B2B customers in self-service channels. And from 2016 to 2019, there's been a very significant increase in the number of customers who actually prefer self-service to direct service, whether that's a call center or somebody coming to visit you, in the areas of research, evaluation of products and services, actually ordering and reordering. And this is really expected to accelerate even further after post-lockdown. So the development of self-service channels, we think are also going to be really important. And again, going back to how many completely new entrants of digital channels have been created during the COVID crisis and the lockdown, I think it's really important to reevaluate those channels in terms of customer experience, in terms of user experience, and just basic effortlessness and effectiveness. And then the final one is communication. I think what like a lot of brands have learned, and we've heard some stories, is when you had to do kind of faster, better, cheaper in developing communication during the crisis because you didn't really have like 6 or 8 months to develop a campaign, how people really quickly adjusted to developing ideas, finding new channels, finding new production methodologies, and then just using the fact that people really are starting to search for information in a more fragmented way, a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit of the word of mouth, a little bit more social, maybe less kind of traditional media channels. It's really, I think, a good time to start thinking, how can you use digital channels more creatively, more effectively, more kind of performance oriented and more personally. This is not the easiest thing to see, but you can see it in the presentation. I mean, Generation X is very much into broadcast TV and, you know, and using traditional media channels, but millennials are in online videos, music streaming, online TV streaming, online magazines, and things like that as our Generation Z. These are the channels that should be really explored in terms of not only where to find people, of where they're hanging out and where you might be able to communicate with them, but also the style of communication, how it might be different in these digital channels than in traditional channels. So really, it's like the critical question to ask oneself is like, is there an opportunity to leverage kind of like fragmentation of media consumption, become more efficient and effective, and actually find new innovative ways to actually optimizing the cost of customer acquisition and customer retention, whether that's referral programs or other means of communication to get the message out and to connect with consumers. Any questions here?
Not in the chat. There's been more of a generic question that came in over the YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily related back to communications, but maybe still interesting to ask. So the question is, what is the good ratio between innovation efforts versus current business efforts for a telco?
That's actually one of our last slides. There is no perfect formula for this that's been scientifically validated. What we like to use is the old Koch rule of 70, 20, 10. So spending 70% of your resources on things that you know that work. And that means also making them better and, you know, really incremental innovation just for existing customers with your existing offers, just to focus on that. But whether it's through tweaking in terms of certain benefits or features and functionality or communication, I think for large, let's say, legacy organizations, to focus 70% of what you know works. So pushing existing core products in, 20% on maybe actually evolving the core business, which kind of like evolutionary innovation. So it's not doing crazy drastic things. But yeah, for telcos, it would be like, okay, can I create, besides just fixed internet, can I create new valuable services around that? So it's to existing customers, but with new capabilities, to spend a little bit of resource on that, and maybe 10% on just trying crazy things and exploring new possibilities that are uncharted or where you haven't gone before. So for us, it's kind of like the 70, 20, 10. 70 on the core business, 20 of evolving the core business into new capabilities, new services, and 10% on just really experimental exploration.
Okay, great. There was another question there, but I actually know that you're also going to be talking about that later on. So then my suggestion would be to leave the questions from now, and then we can just move on to the next stage.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
The third kind of opportunity space is how to better service and therefore to monetize the home. So cocooning is back. It's been around, but it's going to pick up. People will go out more. They will stay at home less, but they will still be more staying at home post lockdown for various reasons. So one is global studies estimate that the hybrid workforce is here to stay, that some 40% of workers will prefer to actually continue some amount of home office, as well as encouragement from their employers around that. So it's going to be more work at home that requires more services, that requires more platforms, that requires a lot of different kind of like new benefits that can be created. Also, people will be hanging around at home more because they'll be transferring some of the money that they were spending outside the home into the home, cooking more, entertaining yourself at home a little bit more. And there's still going to be a bit of a lingering anxiety for like the family and a thinking of safety first. There's just too many reports in the news right now about second outbursts, and the curve has not been completely flattened. So for various reasons, home is going to be the place where we work, play, learn, do a lot of things more often than before. Entertainment. So we're talking about opportunities for innovation. This is where we wouldn't recommend making huge investments in challenging the likes of Amazon Entertainment and HBO and Netflix. These companies are throwing billions annually into content production. During the crisis or during the lockdown, Netflix picked up 16 million new customers globally, paid subscribers. Their numbers look really good. Their stock has been performing really well. And the quality of the stuff that these guys are doing is just so over the top. And it's a difficult place to enter. And it's also difficult to play in the space of entertainment, even with niche kind of content that is very different from the big players. I was just listening to something about Quibi today that they seem to be dying from an assisted suicide. It was supposed to be a platform, short format, young people, very niche, not going very well at all, because this is where they're flocking to. Just food for thought, there might be opportunity spaces and different kinds of content. Podcasts have been going through the roof over the last couple of years. There's a lot of entertainment series out there, business panel series. It's a really interesting area to maybe start thinking of. Maybe there's an opportunity to create content here, maybe for kids, maybe for adults. Education platforms that can be actually utilized at home could be a really interesting opportunity to actually deliver more value within the home. 47% of US consumers say that they would be really happy if their broadband or mobile provider actually offered some sort of tools. So the market and the demand is there. And again, the opportunities just are only limited by the imagination. I'm not even going to go into the whole work thing, but that is just opening up a whole new door of possibilities. Another one is just like home personal assistance, home management, and health. There's a virtual assistant that was developed in Switzerland by an automaker and the university, which is basically an interface that interacts with users either through voice or directly through the tablet to control all aspects of their smart home. So it's kind of an add-on and a plug-in for smart home solutions. And the business case for this is really interesting because it's being adopted as a standard feature for real estate developers who are actually building homes for the elderly and things like that. So the entire market is actually devoted to real estate developers who are integrating this feature as part of the real estate space that they're developing. So any telco brand right now that has launched any aspect of a smart home, this is really the place to start exploring new possibilities in any of the areas that I talked about. New formats for entertainment, new formats for kind of like home management, new features for like health and work. So this is, I think, a really rich area to actually explore right now. Bart, I'm assuming there's no questions?
Actually, there is. There is a question from Akos that is, do you think a telco could be credible in content creation, either in entertainment, learning, content, or how could a telco be credible in this?
I think it could be credible only in the quality of content that it's able to create. So the credibility question comes in is like, do I think that this is going to be good enough that I'm going to consume it regularly and I'm willing to pay a certain amount of money for it? So the credibility is going to come from the teased quality that you show, in the same way that, you know, content providers actually advertise upcoming features and things like that. I think there might be opportunities to create high quality content that would be buyable, let's say, or the people would be willing to pay for, by looking at kind of like strategic alliances with content producers. So it's more like, I mean, I don't think that any telco that is developing any kind of content platform is doing everything totally in-house, but to further explore the possibilities of really rich potential collaborators that can actually make those platforms better. But I think the big question is going to be like, which type of content, and is the market so saturated with really strong players that it makes it interesting to actually spend money on looking at that market. So I think the costs of entry are high. I think the competitive landscape is just pretty big and pretty strong. That's why I thought it was interesting to go into different formats of content rather than just video.
Okay. Then there is a second question coming in from Soma. Telcos are competing with each other in minute and data prices, so in rates, for a very long time, although nowadays most of the operators are offering limitless services. What do you think is next? What are the features they should focus on in the future to address the shifting customer demands?
I think that the answer is to stop thinking about about bundles, because this is where it's going, right? So if you think about the unbundling of the telco industry, you have so many choices right now for voice. You have the rise of messaging apps that have really, I think, made, let's say, classic SMS not so interesting, whether it's your Facebook Messenger or WhatsApps or whatever. And then, so those have started to lose monetary value because people are getting it for free through other platforms. And then the last one that was left was data. And now the trend is there also, unlimited data. So I think those are going to be relevant and important bundles, but in terms of future revenue growth, it's platforms. It's for me, a really good area is still that area around the home, is what kind of new monetizable platforms can you create for the home? So really like added value services, and to think about and to learn from the past, which if you look at how many brands have now billion-euro valuations because they were able to use telco networks to create unique brand experiences. You've got this infrastructure that has made a lot of people rich. And I always wonder why didn't the industry explore these new possibilities before outsiders did. So you had the infrastructure. So it's anything that's going to be built on the infrastructure. And now I think with like new demand, I think 5G enabled. So monetizing the home, I think, is an interesting platform or an interesting area. And then we'll talk a little bit about 5G possibilities as well, which 5G IoT, that entire wave is presenting huge opportunities to deliver new value that you can actually charge for.
Yeah, great. And thank you for that. Then that was the last question. Also nothing from YouTube. So then we're happy to move on.
Thank you, Bart. The last is just a few words about 5G. So this is from an article that I read in Telecoms, which is like an industry blog. And one industry leader just directly said, we previously believed that 2020 was going to be the real year of 5G. This is no longer the case under the current circumstances. So from a lot of things that we've been reading and hearing is a lot of then like the further investments in 5G have been put a little bit on hold as companies reprioritize where to actually spend money. And we actually believe that the opportunity to start delivering and working on 5G enabled services is the right place to go. We don't believe that the right place to do it is with consumer products, but rather focusing on enterprise. As you know, 5G also requires a 5G enabled phone. And previous predictions for, like, say, affordable phones to be a catalyst for actually adoption of 5G bundles was like the big thing. But now 5G phones are likely to represent only 11% of the total phone shipments in 2020. It's a huge investment for people to make, to buy another 1,000, to upgrade, with another 1,000 euros to a new phone, and then, pay for premium bundles, where this is where you really ask yourself, it's like, do I really need, my video on my mobile to be a little bit faster? And am I really going to notice the difference to be able to spend that amount of money? So where we actually think the big opportunities is with enterprise. So not 5G bundles, but really 5G enabled services for business customers, especially large enterprise. I think a lot of companies are already looking into this, but if we look at some information from another kind of like global study, this chart shows for enterprise, the percentage that is led by communication services providers, right? So this is like, say, telcos leading the charge to innovate, highly monetizable, smart solutions for production, logistics, health, cities, airports. Only 21% are actually led by communication service providers. 40% are led by secondary suppliers in the communication services space. 32% are enterprises just doing it by themselves. So this 21%, indicates a huge area of growth about how to create new services that could be actually highly lucrative to take advantage of everything that's happening with the surge of enabling technologies. So we really believe that, as it says here in the text, a sensible approach would be really to work very closely with enterprise customers about their business problems and then work out solutions to see how 5G can help. And as I said, that 21% leaves 80%, which is a huge, interesting market to go into. So in terms of innovation, then, it's like, I think really the time to suspend rigid rules of business as usual and how products are developed and rolled out. 50% of business leaders do not know how to reallocate resources in the new normal. What we're saying, we have some recommendation for it or some thoughts about it, but we think some of it needs to be reallocated to revenue growth and not just cost savings. Many are feeling a little bit unprepared for starting improvement programs. There's a lot of ways to work around that. We believe a big part is really having a deep customer understanding and how change is impacting potential for the industry. And while 88% of business leaders are focusing on cost management, and this is really important and understandably so, you need to find the balance of being able to do both at the same time. Effectively manage costs, but don't leave revenue generation on the back burner and then just keep trying to, sell what you have. It really is time right now to invest in innovation. Whether incremental or drastic, it's time to rethink customer offerings so you're better prepared for the future. So we believe that companies should be revenue driven. You can downsize yourself into non-existence. You can be very operationally efficient and cost efficient, but without a customer base, this means nothing. It is a time to take a few risks, calculated risks, and look at opportunities that haven't been looked at before. Also take a few calculated risks with resource and investment, but just simply know when to stop the risk. And this is where enhanced agility within companies plays a really big role. So just have a much faster turnaround times of recognizing an opportunity and validating an opportunity and rolling it out, but also at the same time to understand as quickly as possible which opportunities are not panning out. So in conclusion, this is a time of crisis is actually a pretty good time to actually invest in innovation. This graph represents the performance of the S&P 500 indexed at 100 in 2007. By the 2008 crisis, just the typical S&P kind of companies were performing at 55% or maybe 50% of where they were performing in 2007 in terms of market cap. Companies that invested in innovation, these are the companies named by Fast Company as the world's most innovative companies, had a less of a shock. They underperformed like everybody did in the crisis, but not as badly as the laggards who did not invest in innovation. And what's interesting is throughout the crisis, 4 years later, the performance of innovators was 30% higher than the average of the S&P 500, which had come back to performing at about the same level of 2007. So at an index of 100%, but the innovators were performing at 130%. So this is also, I'm not sure if that's always the perfect comparison between the financial crisis of 2008 and this one, but it's an interesting indicator that shows in numbers that investing in innovation actually adds to the performance and the shareholder value of your company. So kind of like in conclusion, we talked about 3 different areas to devote some resources to innovation. 2 of them were around exploiting the core. So this is just doing business, the current business, but optimizing it to actually meet customer expectations, behaviors, and demands marginally better, incrementally better. And those were in the areas of carefulness and spending with ideas like freemium business models, pimping up some value segments, creating mechanics and platforms that reduce the risk of purchase and entry. But also in terms of exploiting the core, it's the accelerated digitalization and building momentum of initiatives that companies have already taken and just simply making them better in terms of e-commerce, self-service, and communication. Evolving the core, we think that, so this is basically the core connectivity business. And we do believe that the home is just a huge, huge source of potential innovation, customer benefits, and therefore revenue streams for companies. Just a few ideas, there's a lot more, but it could be in entertainment, learning, health, and obviously working. And exploring the core is to think about really new capabilities, new customer segments, completely new offerings with not 5G bundles, but 5G IoT-enabled services for enterprise. So we do think that's a very interesting area, and it's something that could have like really, really high future potential. and just think about working a little bit differently. So as the network has always been the biggest asset, we think that customers, and in terms of understanding customers and continuous value delivery in the face of changing expectations and the changing nature of demand, it's actually the customer that becomes the biggest asset. And that is it for me.
Perfect. And thank you so much, Joe.
And I thank you very much for listening.
There is one question that still came in by Peter, which is that Peter always felt that the 5G will be the Blu-ray disc of telcos, and he would like to know, what do you think that could be the thing that will make customers say that they want the 5G phone and they want the 5G service right now?
For consumer bundles?
Unsure, not clearly defined. Peter, if you wish to clarify on your question, feel free to speak up. Peter says yes for bundles.
I think it's really difficult. I think it requires looking at some hardcore target groups that actually require that capability more than others, and maybe some sort of specific targeting. I don't know, gamers. Gamers require a lot of data, for instance. I'm not a tech nerd, but you know, I've been like reading some stuff of what the big companies that get most of the internet traffic would be like Google, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, and we've been reading a little bit like in their backend, they're doing some like bitrate optimization so that even if you're like in a 3G network, the quality of your streaming and of your service of like your whatever website you're on is not that badly affected, because they want people to have the same positive experience, whether they're in a 3G or a 4G network. So that being said, I'm not sure if just for regular usage, the perceived difference is going to be so high that everybody is going to want it. Where it could be interesting is to really start looking at certain use cases and then therefore defining behavioral customer segments where this really will move the needle on their experience. But I think that's the first, because that's what you're selling essentially is a better experience when you're talking about consumer bundles. So you have to find out where those are.
Perfect. Peter says, thank you. Then Zul likes to counter, or maybe not counter, more like a regional point. He says that here in the Middle East, we see SMBs and large firms making declarations of increased investment in IT as a reaction to the COVID pandemic. So effectively, they're doubling down on their own digitization of customer touchpoints. And we see this as a big opportunity for us as a telco that also offers digital services.
I think that's really great. So, I mean, if this is the trend, then this is the opportunity. And a lot of companies are doubling down. And I think the question is, how can the telco provide the most value? And there are certain regions of the world that are just way more advanced. Like I've always been just utterly fascinated by how Africa is so ahead of mobile banking and digital banking versus, you know, the Western countries. But thank you for the counters, Zul. And if it's happening, that really is a huge opportunity.
Cool, thank you. Then checking if anybody still has questions, or you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself if you want to. Checking YouTube. So nothing on YouTube, that's straightforward. I also do not see any questions more in here. So then I would say that leaves us nothing but thank you, Joe, for presenting and bringing forward the thoughts and ideas of the opportunity rounds and the impact of not only COVID, but also other accelerated consumer trends on telco. And then we would like everybody who participated as well. Thank you so much for participating in this first series. If you have any feedback, we would love to hear how we can improve these series moving forward. If you wish to see the recording, I will share again the link to that recording in the chat right now. Feel free to share that with any of your colleagues or maybe friends who might be interested in this as well. And as said, if you wish to know a little bit more about LHBS and the services that we offer, then please visit our website, and we are always happy to enter in the discussion on telco or any of your business opportunities.
And thank you also for participating. We hope that we're able to bring some value to you this afternoon. And thank you, Bart, for moderating, and enjoy the afternoon.
Ciao, see you.